Is there a strategy that'll help you grow your company faster? CEO Sales Strategies is an investigative business podcast for entrepreneurial people who never stop asking questions. Highly acclaimed sales revenue growth expert Doug C. Brown interviews CEOs, business owners, and professionals who serve them to uncover and share actionable tips and methods behind their bulletproof sales strategies. Topics covered on the show include their failures, struggles, secrets, and processes that help them succeed in selling millions to billions of dollars of their products and services, all with the sole aim of helping you grow your business. If you are eager to know the most effective sales secrets from the A players of the game, then the CEO Sales Strategies podcast is certainly the place to be.
Hey, this is Doug C. Brown from the CEO Sales Strategy Podcast, here with another episode. And today, I have brought on a very young, successful entrepreneur who's really doing great things. Her name is Shriya Sekhsaria. That's a word, right? Shriya Sekhsaria. And she is from India. She studied in the United States. She's a very intelligent woman. She has built a company called Lumhaa. And Lumhaa is a company that comes from a place of doing really good. And what they create is memories for people. And they do something called memory jars. And as you'll see in the episode, and here in the episode, the story of how this company formed and the journey of this person. And what we really focus on in this particular episode is the success traits that she has, as well as what I've observed thousands and thousands of successful business owners and CEOs and leaderships of companies having these same success traits. So what I recommend is you pick out the success traits that are within this and incorporate those into your own life. She's a very smart gal. She's an accomplished published author of multiple books. And she has a vast knowledge of formal education here in the United States. And she's, as you'll find, she's not always going to agree with me. From the moment we met, one of the things that I've really appreciated about her is her view on things at her place in life, 25 years old, my place in life, 58 years old. We agree on a lot, but we disagree, or we healthily, respectfully disagree with one another. And you're going to find that through this episode. And it's just a wonderful thing. And that's a success trait as well amongst business owners. So without further ado, let's invite her, Shriya Sekhsaria of Lumhaa, if I hope I pronounced that right. And you'll see I didn't in our episode a few times. So it took me about 4 times to get this. Let's introduce her and bring her on in right now. Shriya, welcome to the call of the CEO Sales Strategy Podcast.
Thank you.
It's interesting for those who don't know you. You and I were just talking, and I was saying, we've been friends for like 25 years. And you said back to me, what?
That I'm not even 25 years old yet. So,
and I said to you, geez, now I know how old I actually can feel. So it's awesome to have a young entrepreneur on here who's doing great things. And you have a lot of success traits that I see in multi-billion-dollar companies, people who are doing at least 50 million and up. And, for your company, it's a growing company, but you have all these success traits. And I wanted to speak about these and talk to the audience about, what you've done, what you do on a daily basis. And, I think we had a really good discussion prior to here. I mean, you had the largest day that you've ever had in your business today. And I think that a lot of people don't think about, celebrating wins enough. But I know you well enough to know that you probably have some idea on how to celebrate wins. And I found this to be a success trait throughout companies. How do you feel about celebrating success, and how important do you think it is for companies to do so?
I mean, I only made an entire company around celebrating the little moments. So I think we're starting with a biased question here. I obviously think that celebrating wins is hugely important, but even more important is defining what the win means for you. Because in a lot of cases, you've got people who define the traditional wins as, oh, I made my first million and I hired a certain number of people. But in some cases, a win is also not losing 5 million and not having to fire someone else. So, first of all, defining what a win means for you and understanding that that can be something as small as I made it to my workout while walking my dog this morning to, I just landed the biggest MNC in the world. So define your wins and to celebrate them, figure out what makes you happy. I think whenever we think about celebration, there's this cultural narrative almost which involves parties and friends and big. But there are some people who identify as introverts who get their energy from chilling in bed with Netflix and a tub of ice cream, congratulating themselves. So first define your wins, then figure out what celebration style you want to go with. And more importantly, I think as a CEO, identify what celebration style your team wants. Because when it came to the initial wins, I would try to make everyone be celebrated by the company by sending a company-wide email congratulating them, or get obnoxious cakes or make little memory jars with their faces on them. And then it took me a while to realize that not everyone likes to celebrate like that. So as a CEO, be respectful of the different ways that your teammates like to celebrate and give them opportunities to do that. Like, someone's an introvert, they want to celebrate at home by themselves, give them an early day instead of keeping them in the office for a party. Someone likes other people to congratulate them, throw them a party. Me, myself, I am more of the mixed breed where in most cases, I just like to write notes to myself, congratulating myself on wins, because then anytime I feel down, I revisit those notes. And these notes, of course, are in the form of a memory jar for me. So I have this little memory jar of all of the different wins I've had. And whenever I'm feeling down or dealing with something, I go back and look at those. And every month I try to find one reason to throw a party. And every Friday I try to find one reason to have cake. So even if there isn't a real win, to get said cake, I develop or create a win in my mind. So that's how I think about celebrating wins. I think it's hugely important.
Well, it's a really important point for people who are in business, because a lot of times people get involved in business and they're so mired down into the actual business of, being in business versus the business of being in life. And a lot of people I have found, working with clients or, even in my own companies, I've been guilty of this, where we just get myopically focused on the business mission, the business that has to be everything. And before you know it, we're not celebrating the wins on the personal level. And there's two sides to business. There's the corporate agenda, and then there's the personal agenda of the people who are working there. And both of them I have found need to be synonymous for business growth. Do you find the same?
I think it's more than two even. I think there's also a social agenda on top of that, or a societal one, if you please, where you want personal alignment with what the business is doing, but you also want the business to align with what society needs and wants. So I think that it is best if there's some sort of synonymity, but it doesn't stop just with the business. You think more about the world. And if you're really out there, then you also think not only about your personal, your corporate, and your societal, you also think about the future agenda and what the generations ahead, if you accelerated evolution, would want. So ideally, you have alignment in all four of those. And you can keep adding layers and going nuts, but I do think that the more synonymous it is, the easier decisions become, right? Because at whichever layer there's conflict, it magnifies in different ways. If your personal agenda doesn't match the corporate one, there's burnout. There's a lot of cases in which I've met business leaders who kind of don't like to look in the mirror and feel like they can't stand in the sunshine because of decisions they've made. And it leads to a lot of issues that I think are problematic on a personal and a company level. And same way, if you look at the disconnect between a company and a society, or you look at a disconnect between a company and what future generations are expecting, I'm sure you can pick up any headline and boil it down to issues like these. So I think there are lots of agendas that need aligning when you're doing this.
So one of the greatest things that I think happens between our conversations when we're conversing is you find an area and you're able to spot that area. So I bring up two things. You're like, I think there's a third, right? And here's the thing, folks, you folks listening, those of you who have partners in life, business partners or whatever, if you always agree, you have the wrong partners. So you actually have no need for partners most of the time. So, success trait number 2 is find people who can broaden your own horizon. And I know you've done that through your story. And if I mispronounce your company name, because, it's a unique name. So Lumhaa, is that right?
No, it's Lumhaa.
Lumhaa. Jeez.
There we go.
So, all right. So all of you laughing right now. Lumhaa. So I found it fascinating how the company, we started, and it started from a story, basically, from what I read about everything. And it appears that this story came to you because you were working with terminally ill children and you wanted to kind of celebrate their lives or in some capacity. So I'll ask you, how did the story, you were working with terminally ill children and you come up with this idea for the parents of these children? And so what was the genesis? How did it all come about?
You mean aside from what you just said?
Aside from what I just said.
Okay, so the background of how Lama actually started was that I grew up in high school writing a bunch of novels that went on to become bestsellers. And so the deal I had with the publisher at the time was that for every novel that becomes a bestseller, I would be allowed to write a nonfiction book. And then the royalties from that nonfiction book would go towards a community in need. And the publisher and I would both give our shares because, the novels made the money they wanted. So during my freshman year of college, I was working on this book, like you said, about terminally ill children who were below the poverty line in India. And the idea was that I would spend a few days living with each child and their families and trying to capture as authentically as possible their lives, so that when we wrote this book and people bought the book, there would be an awareness of the cause that they were giving to and the amazing lives they were helping. And so I spent time with each of these kids and they were the sweetest. They made me little drawings and showed me what their schools were like and shared stories with me. And we had pages and pages of recordings and, hours of footage and things like that. So we did this with quite a few kids across the country. And what ended up happening was the publishing cycle, for those who don't know, is terribly slow in some cases, and it can take very many months to get your book to actual print. And so that's what happened in this case, unfortunately, and a lot of the children passed away. So we needed a way, or at least I wanted a way, to feel less helpless in this situation. So when I was at home thinking about what I could do, I spotted these giant glass jars in my kitchen. And if you know any Indian grandmas, at the risk of stereotyping, there are almost always large glass jars in their kitchen.
Yeah, I have an English grandmother, so yes.
Yeah. So I took these jars and labeled each one with the child's name, and whatever we had from the child, like interview notes, drawings they made, printouts of photos, on pen drives, we put footage, hoping that someday the parents would be able to see it. We filled as much as we could about each child and shipped it to their families. And then the parents really appreciated having that. After that, we did work with army units and different groups like that. And we saw that the memory jars were generally something that uplifted mood. And obviously, it didn't bring the people back, but it just for a second made them feel like they were still connected to the people they'd lost. So that's how the memory jar concept came about. And then I can talk more about my thesis and how it became a tech platform and the psychology research behind it and why that became a company. But the memory jar concept really came from these kids.
Well, I think it's really important for people because they get lost. A lot of times that when I see companies, they're kind of stuck. They don't have their story anymore. They had this old story. It's kind of stale. People have come in, and they don't really realize what the original vision of the company was. And it all comes from a story. And, as, we're children. I mean, we learn through stories, a lot of times through stories. So, and as we get to be older adults, not you, me, but as we get to become older adults, we tend to start to think that we're no longer children, and instead of the extension of the child in a larger, older body, right? Because we carry our memories with us. So what you've done is created this amazing ability for somebody to remember people in the ways that they want to remember them, and as well as to reconnect with people on a regular basis. I mean, I know, like my dad passed away. I go to his gravesite and I talk with him. Why? I still want that connection, right? Same with my grandparents. So how important do you think it is for a company to evolve and continuously continue to evolve, to work on the story of the company versus just working on sales alone? Because what I found in sales is stories actually sell.
Oh, yeah. Stories do sell. So I think there are two types of stories we're talking about here, right? One is the story of why. And I think that is really the North Star of the company as to why it was created. And if that starts to change, that's a little shady, because that should be the truth of why the founder created the company they did. And I think over time, founders do get more clarity about their own personal why, and that comes into the story. But the incidents that led to the creation of the company, I think, sort of stay the same, or should stay the same. The second piece, which you were mentioning, is stories sell. And those, I think, have to evolve all the time, because people learn through stories. And when you're selling them something, they're effectively learning about you and your business. And different people learn from different stories, because to understand a story and to learn from it, you have to have a certain baseline amount of experience. And so when things seem familiar, it's easier to understand them. And that's why, depending on the person you're speaking with, the story that resonates with them is going to be really different. Let me put it in more concrete terms that might make more sense. So when I'm talking about Lumhaa specifically, we do memory jars for all kinds of occasions and events and people. So one example is the memorial jar, which is what we were talking about, which is when a person passes away. The second type of example is a graduation jar, where multiple people can post wishes for a graduating senior on a digital link and then get the physical version. So when I'm talking to a person who's interested in the memorial type of jar, the story that I'm going to tell them is about how we've done this for kids or the senior citizen homes we've worked with. And I'd pick one example and give them that. But when I'm speaking to someone who's interested in the graduation type of jar, I'm going to tell them the story of how during the pandemic, when my brother graduated, we did this really cool thing for him, because that story is going to resonate more. So I think there's one story, which is you expressing yourself to the world as to why you did this. And then there's the other story, which you're using to explain the concept to a person and to sell a certain product and to explain your vision. So the second type of story changes. The first one, I think, largely stays the same. At least for me, it has.
So to recap that, it's you have your North Star story, which is the vision. And then you have continuous evolutionary stories that are working through the time with us that we could use to continue to promote and express who we are as a company, but also to connect with people on another level. Because, and this is really important for everybody to know, because when we start a company, we have this vision. We all do. Right. And we all think it's going to be the greatest thing ever. and then we go out and, which we're going to get to in a minute. We go out and we actually start the business. We start putting it forth. And our vision sometimes isn't congruent with the market's vision. Even if we've done the research, we think, oh, it's an idea. And I know you ran into this, because I remember reading that you started your company. You had 2 years worth of development under your belt.
Oh, I know where this is going.
You started the company. Well, we've all, look, anyone who's had business experiences has had this happen to them. and where you began the process, and then you put the idea out there, and you found that people either A, weren't buying it, or B, they were buying it, but they weren't actually implementing their part of the transaction, which was, okay, now you got to actually create the memory jar, right? I mean, or
yeah, I call it the crickets phenomenon, which is you literally hear crickets. There's no activity whatsoever going on your platform. It's just crickets. And that's a really, really sad place to be, because then it gets hard internally where people kind of blame each other. But I think as a founder or a CEO specifically, you take responsibility and try to figure out what went wrong. And more importantly, how do we fix it? So I did have that situation happen, like you said, where we spent 2 years developing an app and then launched it, and then not a single person wanted to use it. And the few that did download it to give it a try didn't actually make a memory jar or add a memory. And the way we dealt with that, sorry if I'm spoiling the line of questioning here, but the way we dealt with that is to be humble and say that, this is a product that we know and hope is going to be good for a lot of people. So instead of saying that we know what's good for you, let's ask people what they want and what's good for them. And so we ran a design sprint and had people join in virtually and in the office and actually tell us that, hey, this is the kind of app that I want, and this is the kind of activity I want, and this is how I want to share my memories, and this is what I want the physical version to look like. And so we just sat back and cried a little bit about the paychecks we signed when our users were doing all of the work. No, not really. The team was awesome. We just sat back and really, really listened and let them not only design, but also feel accountability in what they were designing. And I think that was important for 2 reasons. One, they told us what they wanted, so we knew what to build. And 2, because they were getting what they wanted to show other people the awesome stuff they built. So we actually created a hall of fame on our website where you can go and see each user's name and which piece of the company they've designed. And that became a great sales and marketing tool, because our users then not only became our designers, they also became our salespeople.
So, what's great about this is there's a lot of these nuggets that are coming up, but they're not really, I would say, we're not highlighting like, do this, do that. But if people are listening, I'm going to unpack this for a second. So we all run into challenges in our company, all of us. It doesn't really matter. I've worked with tens of thousands of companies. Every one of them runs into a challenge. Where they make the mistake, where you did not, was you go back to self-assessment. You get brutally honest and you say, okay, here we're going to go back. We're going to assess this situation. And now we're going to take action on that, but we're going to get humble. We know that it's not working. So we're not going to get this arrogance play and we're going to just say, we're going to crush this thing. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to our market and we're going to actually get the answers from the market, because there was interest there. And so this is a very high success point for businesses to really understand. Your market will tell you the answers. You don't have to figure it out all internally. And I think the other thing that happened out of this, which was great, was you actually helped your users and empowered your users to actually become part of the company in the strategy of helping them to help themselves to grow your company by allowing them to help design the app and have input in on all these things. And as much as that is important, the second part, which a lot of companies forget, is to reward their customers, right? And so you're building up the human dynamic, and I know that's part of your company mission, but you're doing it with your clients, and your clients now becoming advocates for your product, your services, and they are now becoming essentially your sales force. So you have this large commission-only sales force that, where all these other companies are trying to figure out, well, I got to hire and pay base salaries and all this other stuff. And we do have to do it internally as well. But when one can build a external, I'll just say, army of advocates that promote their programs and products and services, their company will magically grow. Have you found this with your company magically growing through the power of people?
I think so. I mean, if you're saying my company's magical, I'm going to take the compliment here. I'm not going to find that. But in terms of how the company growth was affected, definitively, because I mean, even if you're not talking about external people, right? The way a lot of companies start off is by you telling the people in your life that this is the thing I'm doing. And then you can hope that those people tell the people in their lives. And so I think it's almost always network effects that grow it. And so having so many different people join the net of your network only means that exponential growth. And I think we were fortunate that people understood that we don't want to grow it as my company or as mine and the team's company. It very much is a community company. You know, Doug, because we've had conversations about this, that the people who make our products come from emerging communities and they get a cut of whatever products are sold. And the schools we work with also receive a cut for the work they're doing. And so the way we've built the whole business is with the idea that this is something we've built for the community and therefore it belongs to everyone. And in terms of both the reward and the responsibility, I feel really fortunate that that's how it's played out.
And you've developed a worldwide company now doing 150 sales a day, right? So this is really cool. And the whole theme of what I asked you to be on to this podcast was because you daily practice what I call psychological well-being in your life and in your business, right? So let's talk about psychological well-being as how it affects not only the person, but how it affects the business and how we should probably give higher consideration. Because I can tell you in the United States, for example, and most of North America, they don't focus on this. They look at the business. They go, okay, here's the business mission. Here's this, here's that. But you practice psychological well-being, and it's part of what I've recognized, that whether they're a very large company doing multiple billions of dollars, the leaders especially practice psychological well-being. And I think it's an overlooked area of a successful business. How do you feel about, I mean, your routines, for example? What I recognized was you get up and you exercise and you learn something new. That's kind of your daily mantra of getting up and doing something like that, right? So that one point, how much does that prepare you for your day and to go into the day with a better mind? Because what I've learned is 80% of business failure comes from the leadership, and 80% of that comes from the lack of them conditioning their mind. How do you feel about this?
The fact that you're blaming the leaders for companies failing. I think there's a lot to be said about psychological well-being and extending that also to psychological safety. Obviously, this is one of the things my thesis was about, so I can go on for hours and hours about it. But to spare our listeners, to talk specifically about the workouts in the morning, I think it's incredibly important to have me time. And whatever that me time consists of is totally fine. I know a lot of people who say workouts have those endorphins and that makes you feel good, and so you should work out before going to work. I work out because my team refuses to let me in the office if I don't, because I get super cranky if I haven't worked out in the morning. I trained for nationals in archery, and so I had a really strenuous training schedule before I got into business. And because my body's sort of used to that, if I don't get a fraction of that, then I'm biting everyone's heads off and nobody wants to work with me. So my team literally asks me, have you worked out today? And if I say no, they don't let me in. So that's the reason I work out. But the bigger point that I'm trying to make here is it doesn't matter if what you're doing in the morning is working out or reading a book or I don't know, watching cartoons with your kids. It's you carving out some time in the day to prioritize yourself. And whether that's the first thing you do in the morning or the last thing you do before going to bed, just making sure that you're well taken care of, like you said, is the first step in making sure your team and business is well taken care of. Because if you're constantly waiting for that one day you're going to go on vacation and relax, or that time when, everything is going to be just pristine and you can hang out with your team or whatever. It's not going to work that way. I think people say this and it's super cliched, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. And in the marathon, you don't have a lot of pit stops. You got to just keep going. So building in those pit stops while you're running is important instead of stopping.
Yeah. And then after the marathon, rest. Right. So if you run a marathon, you don't wake up tomorrow morning, most people, and run another marathon. And then 2 days later, wake up and run another marathon. From working out, one of the most important components of working out, especially if you're doing, strenuous like weight exercises or whatever, a lot of those folks who are, the big, bulky, healthy looking people, they rest. And the fact that you condition, or I would say your psychological well-being in the morning, and I know you also do it at night, you learn something new every day, usually about the business or something else. A lot of successful people that I have been able to have the fortune of interfacing with, they do this. This is a success principle. They wake up in the morning, they get their psychological well-being in order. They do it at the evening as well. And they're usually practicing in between. There's an old statement that people like, Firestone Tires, Harvey Firestone, Henry Ford, and all of those used to get together, and they used to actually in the mornings practice psychological well-being, because
you practice psychological well-being.
So even getting together and figuring out what is the most important value things that we can do today. Right. Putting our mind in the frame of, okay, let's think proactive and let's think growth, because it's really easy. I mean, you click on the news in the morning or.
Gotcha. So you're talking about mental state. So
yes.
Psychological well-being is actually defined, and the most commonly accepted definition is from Griff, 1989, and it's defined as 6 different metrics that measure your psychological well-being. So it's different things like your environmental mastery and self-acceptance and growth. And so that's why when you said you practice psychological well-being, I was like, that's a scale. But I agree. It's about being in a frame of mind that's productive and happy. And I don't. And it's telling that there's no technical term for it, that we're using substitute technical terms for it. That's telling about how underlooked it is.
Yeah. And when we're in that frame, we make better decisions. Like you said, if you're not in that frame, you come in a little bit cranky, right? And people
a little bit.
So, but nobody wants the boss coming in cranky, because then the day is like, oh geez, right? But when your teams, again, if you have team members and you have partnerships and things that are constantly agreeing with you, you have the wrong people. So you have a right team, because your team's like helping you manage your state as well by making sure that you don't come in unless you actually do what you do in the morning.
I think the best type of team to have is not necessarily one that disagrees with you, but one that knows when to agree and when not to disagree. Because I can tell you, as a founder and as a CEO, and maybe particularly because of the way we've been conditioned, there are a lot of cases in which you're really doubting yourself. And what you need in that moment isn't a team member necessarily to disagree with you. In some cases, you need support, or you need some space to just do what it is that your gut tells you to. Sometimes the signal from your gut is so weak that if you get someone who's consistently disagreeing, then you won't trust your gut signal.
I agree with you on this. It's important to have, one thing I didn't say was to have proactive, active communication, whether you disagree or support, right? In your case.
Right. But also just having people who have the ability to tell whether you need support on that day or you need their opinion is also important. Because obviously everyone is entitled to their opinion and you should encourage sharing it. But there are scenarios, particularly as CEO, when you go to your team member and let's say they've made a really huge mistake. There are 2 ways to deal with that. The first is You tell them that, hey, we totally understand. It's okay. We can deal with it later. And you give them that supportive CEO. And the second way to deal with it is, here's everything you did wrong. Don't do it again next time. And that's a little bit more of a constructive criticism CEO. And one of our biggest hallmarks is figuring out which mood to go into the person. Eventually, they're going to have to meet both, but knowing which side to present is important. So when we're talking about the team too, I think it's underlooked that sometimes CEOs need that treatment too. It's not always about managing, it's also about managing up. So the best types of employees are the ones who can manage up and disagree with you when needed, but also know when you just have to let the CEO be. And I think that's underlooked, this idea of managing up and knowing when to agree and when to disagree, or at least when to stay silent.
Well, I think, again, you bring up a really good point, and it depends on the person who's at the top, right? I mean, if they're the dictator type, they're not going to be accepting that type of feedback. So if they're not, like yourself, or myself, I'm very open to feedback. I mean, this is one of the reasons I asked you on this call, is because I knew you were not going to agree with me throughout this whole on anything, because we've had other conversations and it's been really fun doing this. And so let me go back to the company, the name. Now, I looked this up, and in Hindi or Urdu or whatever, it means something like moment or momentous or in the moment. Now, I could be totally off and just setting myself up here for a body slam. But
for something that's going to get edited out later.
No, I don't edit unless
I know. I'm just messing with you.
So Lumhaa, right?
Lumhaa.
Lama, darn. See, here's the thing, folks. You don't actually have to get it right all the time, right? So don't have to be perfect. So how did the name come about? Because it's a really creative name, and it's something that people will remember. And
really?
Well, I think so. I mean, it's, a lot of times the name of the company, especially if it's catchy, becomes the brand. I mean, the name always has part of the brand. I mean, if you think of companies like, Google, I mean, we don't talk about, let's go to the internet. We go, we go to our favorite browser. We go, let's Google, right? Or Zoom right now. Zoom has now replaced video conferencing. It's like, hey, let's Zoom, So
when is Lumhaa going to become a verb?
Exactly. So how did you come up with the name?
So, I mean, I can make up a nice fancy story. The truth is that when I thought of memory jars, I was like, okay, and this company is going to be called Lumhaa. There was no question of what else it's going to be called. And in fact, I kind of wanted to call it Lumhaa because, of course, I'm very proud of my Indian roots, and I wanted to make it an ode to the children that this started with. So I knew I would probably end up picking a word from there. But when I first wrote my brief, the name was spelled differently and pronounced differently. And I was kind of okay about changing it. But then people told me to change it because they said no one is going to be able to pronounce it. And that's kind of true. We've gotten everything from Lumamam to Luminous to Lumhaa. And just Lumhaa is never the first thing people say. So it gets mispronounced. It's hard to spell. And in most cases, our brand analysis team was like, this is going to be really hard for people to remember. You're going to lose sales because people aren't going to remember the name of your company. And because they told me all of these things, I was like, no, the only one demand I have is that the company name is never going to change. And so all of the people telling me that this is never going to work sort of strengthened my resolve to keep it. But when the idea of doing something with memory jars came, the word Lumhaa, it came with it. It was never, I have this concept, let's figure out a name. It was a joint package. So it was probably some subconscious work going on. And, the kids like the word, the kids that we worked with. And like I said, it's an ode to the country I'm from.
Well, and there's your story, right? That is a great story. I mean, I remember when I was working with a company, they were called Paytech, Paetec Communications. And originally the founder wanted to name the company Genesis. And they went to look and try to buy the URL, and the people wanted like $50,000 for the URL. And they're like, nah, we're not going to do this. So how did they come up with the name Paetec? Right. And it came up because the founder, he had a wife and that many children, and he used the letters of each one of his children and his wife.
Love it.
Right? And his wife came first and used that. Now, here's the thing. When I was working for that company, and that company, I was part of the first, I think, 100 employees in that company. That company grew exponentially, and we eventually sold it for $2 billion. And I say we because I had a bunch of stock, and I was very happy when we sold the company. Right? Now, here's the thing. We used to use that story in every single sales conversation that we would have.
That's when people asked you about the name and how it came about and things, or just generally plug it in.
And they would generally ask, or we would proactively bring it up. And the reason that we would do that is because it was such a unique and wonderful story of a man bonding with his wife and children and bringing the human dynamic into a business play. It actually was a great way to promote the company. And eventually people started hearing the name over and over. They used to think, well, you Paychecks, the payroll company that was in the United States. So I think naming is paramount to a company's brand. I don't think it makes or breaks a brand. I mean, I want to know your thoughts on that, and I'm sure you'll give me your thoughts on this. I don't think it makes or breaks a brand, but I do think the name is an important ingredient in the brand because it's what people remember. Whether they can spell it or pronounce it or not, they still remember.
I think that's partly true. And the reason I say that is because if people can't remember the real name of the company or the full name, they kind of nickname it. Mm-hmm. Like Lumhaa very rarely goes by Lumhaa. Most people just call it Lum. So when people are talking to each other about it, it's Lum, and that's totally fine because it's a derivative of Lumhaa, and the Lum URL is expensive, so maybe one day we'll own it. And so the name is important in that it's the first step, but I think before it becomes a verb, you go through this phase where people are making it their own, and so they just give it its own name. It's like, I don't know, you have daughters because we've spoken about your daughters before, and
yes.
And I'm sure you've nicknamed your daughters, and different people have nicknamed your daughters different things, and I think that's the most endearing thing in the world when people think of your company as something that they care about enough to nickname. So I think if you go completely insane and get Lumhaa spelled in a really weird way and people nickname it, that's totally fine because your name is important, but people are giving it its own name. I do want to emphasize one thing that you said that I think is really important, though, about how you brought in the story for Paytech and humanized the company. It reminded me of a saying that someone told me when I was just starting the business, which is, people do business with people, not businesses. And so having all of these stories humanize the companies is so important. And then you end up with a nice nickname and ideally with a verb, but just making it human is important.
I agree with that and subscribe to that philosophy. One of the things that I've noticed with you and I've noticed with other successful business owners is they have perseverance. They see it through no matter what, right? And, I remember when I used to work with Chet Holmes, Chet used to call this pig-headed discipline and determination. And he wanted to name his book Pig-Headed Discipline and Determination, but the publisher said, no. The ultimate sales machine is what you're naming this. So
sounds about right. Yeah.
But he would see it through. Tony Robbins, when I worked with him, he sees everything through. I mean, everybody, large companies, mid-sized companies, but successful people in general have perseverance. Where did you learn this? I'm curious. Was it part of your upbringing or did you learn it through life?
Where did I learn that successful people have perseverance? From you.
Well, where did you learn? Well said. Where did you learn the power of perseverance for yourself?
So perseverance, I think, came a lot from watching my family, because I've seen my dad, for example, go from being hugely successful in the financial markets to then having to figure out where our next meal was going to come from, to then go back and rebuild his whole empire. And so being surrounded with people like that, I think, made that instinctive. I naturally didn't have the same challenges as him, but growing up, I had quite a few, which was moving into a neighborhood that was quite racist and, having to grow up with children who didn't really understand what to do with an oddball like me. and just more life experiences like that I think made me more perseverant. But the skill that I value more over time, and this is something that I learned in business, is you have to choose what to be perseverant about. Because I think the pig-headedness that you mentioned earlier is really important to mention, because you can't be perseverant about everything. I don't think human beings have that much. I think of it as a resource. I don't think there's enough perseverance to be perseverant about everything. But more importantly, you have to know when to quit. Like, I was running 2 different companies as CEO, and I could have been a whack and continued to do that and continued to work 23.5 hours a day. And that would have ended up with me dying. Or, I could have chosen which one I want to continue persevering on and which one to sort of let go of and choose my battles. So I think it's important to be perseverant, yes, but it's also important to choose what to be perseverant about. And that's a lesson that I didn't fully understand, because it's hard to give up. It's hard to give up on relationships. It's hard to give up on business ideas. It's hard to just throw in the towel. But throwing in the towel in one thing just makes you stronger in the other.
Yeah, a wise man once said to me, when you have your glass so full of water and you want to now pour good water into that glass, you have 2 choices. Either pour it in and watch it spill all over the glass, which is taking on 23.5 hours a day, or pour some out and make some space for better water.
Yeah. Or just like make space for soda or vodka, whatever it is you want to drink. If you want to have a vodka, you want to dilute it with all that water. So.
That was awesome. And I think you bring up a really good point, which is about role models, right? You had your dad, you're watching, role models. And so folks, if you didn't grow up with great role models, then go find them. There's plenty of them out there, right? Find the people. Or imagine them, even better. I mean, I remember Napoleon Hill years ago saying he would do this imaginary mastermind in his head, and he would have people like Abraham Lincoln, and he would ask a question of Lincoln. Hey, if I had this problem, or if you had this problem, Mr. Lincoln, how would you handle it? And the words would come back, right? So yeah. I think it's really important. How do people, let's say they want a memory jar. They want this, they want that from your company, which, by the way, I highly recommend you all do this.
I do too.
How do they get a hold of you, or how do they find you?
So you're welcome to find me if you want. You don't have to. If you want to make a memory jar, you can just go to lumhaa.com. So that's LUMHA.com, or go to the App Store or the Play Store and type in the word Lumhaa. Even if you search memory jar, you should see it. The app is free and it's ad-free. So you can create the digital versions on the app or the website. And then within each digital jar, there's a button to convert it into a physical product, which then connects you with one of our artists. And that's how you can get the physical version of your jar if you want. If you want to reach me, the app has a button called Chat with CEO or Chat with Lumhaa, and that's a direct line to me. So if you have any feedback or any thoughts or just want to find me, that's the way to do it.
That's awesome. And you can get direct access to the CEO of the company, which is always fun, because most people, especially when they're selling, I'm speaking to you salespeople, it's hard to find the CEO sometimes or get the direct access. But I love the fact that you're allowing people just to get direct access to you, even in a growing company where you're so busy and doing all the things you're doing.
Oh, it's always delightful. Like the kinds of calls we get in some cases they're amazing. We had a person that used to call, and this is also taken from a movie, as I found out later, but I had a person who called me and they were like, I really like your photo. And then I said, thanks. And then they called back half an hour later and they're like, my husband also likes your photo. And then I said, thanks. And they called back an hour later and they're like, my kids also like your photo. And then they just keep calling you to tell you that's a nice photo. And then we've had really weird people also call and say, can you plan my proposal for my girlfriend? And then we have people who just prank call and stuff. So it is a lot of trolls and things like that too. But And you get that one user who says that this memory jam means something to me because of this. Or in our cases, we hear a lot of, you made my birthday, you made my wedding special, you made this graduation work, you helped me reconnect with my family. When you hear stories like that, it more than makes up for the trolls. So I can't promise that it'll be an immediate response, but just hearing from people who are interacting with it and understanding that we're no longer in the cricket zone, like we started off with saying, is important and it's motivating. So I like having a direct line.
Well, I like the fact that you do too. I do the same thing for my clients or people who want to talk with me. So it's, this has been a really great episode for me because I've learned a lot, and you bring a different perspective. From the first time we started talking, you just brought a different perspective, and very different than some of the entrepreneurs that I speak with. And so I want to go back to role models. So one last question for you. If you could go back in time or even in present, and you could recreate yourself as someone, it could be someone living or past, who would that person be, and what would you do to better the world as that person, the new one you are?
Why would I pick a different person?
Yeah. So let's say that you want to go back in time, and you could pick somebody back from historical era or even present, living today, and you could adapt those traits of that person, become that person. What would you do to better the world?
That's what I'm asking you. Why would I have to become a different person to acquire a trait to better the world? Why can't I just be myself?
See, there's the answer that I expected from you. So this is good. Now, learning point for everybody. Be you. Too many people are looking at other people. So thank you, Shriya, for the wonderful gift.
For walking right into what you wanted, giving you a glimmer of hope that I won't always disagree with your plan.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people in business, or a lot of people in life in general, are trying to be someone else. They're not being themselves. That's not the authentic, true story that comes out. And what I love about you and your story is it's authentic. People can rely on this as a foundational point of trust in your company, because I'm, talked with you enough to know you are who you are, right? And so we all want to have certainty in our life. And part of having certainty is having those relationships that we can rely upon and trust. And you just bring that forth. So I love the answer to the question. So thank you. And I had a feeling you might say that, but I wasn't sure. So
you mean I'm arrogant enough to say that I wouldn't want to be any other thing? You knew my arrogance.
I would call that healthy confidence, not arrogance.
I enjoyed this conversation so much because whatever I said, you linked it to a trait that super successful people have. So I really appreciate not only learning from you, but an hour of just flattery. So I'm ready to sit here if you want to wrap up the conversation with some more flattery, but this was delightful, Doug. And I really enjoyed the conversation and the questions, and as always, learned a lot. So thank you for doing this.
And same here. I appreciate you being on, and I'm sure the folks who are listening to this as well. So Shriya from Lumhaa. Did I get
Close. Lumhaa. We'll get it one day.
You don't have to be perfect, folks, to be successful. So that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for being on the CEO Sales Strategy podcast. I really appreciate you being here. And I look forward to seeing more growth and having more conversations like this in the future.
Very much likewise. And thank you all for listening.
Hey, this is Doug C. Brown here. And wow. Was that a great episode full of information, success traits? I mean, whether it's not just perseverance or, having the right story and living in and, feeding your emotional well-being throughout the day. It's really important that as owners and leaders of companies, that we, as the leaders, are the people who are actually leading people into proactive, healthy, I'll just call it habits throughout the day, whether it's a personal habit or business habit. There's never been a business challenge or business problem that I've ever encountered, whether it's in my own companies or whether someone else's company, and that didn't tie back to some type of personal challenge. In majority of them, I once heard Tony Robbins say, 80% of businesses' problems are personal issues. And when we develop self-healthy success traits, we make way better decisions, far better decisions, and those decisions lead us to better outcomes. So Shriya is a very smart gal. I highly recommend you go to her website and start a memory jar for yourself. I think it's something you'll hold on to for your whole life, and then pass on to other people. So, it's said that we can't take our money with us when we are no longer here on this earth. We can only take our memories. So go out and make a memory today and put it into a jar, and put a lot of these into jars, and live your legacy. This is Doug C. Brown with the CEO Sales Strategy Podcast. If you like this, please go up and give it a positive 5-star review. Tell other people about it. If this episode can help them, please share this episode. I would be most grateful. Until next time, we will talk again.